I've always wanted to say that. How are you doing? Good? Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I really don't need any excuse to come to New York, but when Priya invited me, I jumped at the opportunity. I just want to start by sharing a visual description. I'm Shani. I'm a South Asian disabled woman, and I have a short stature. I'm about 3'10" in height, and today I think it's a mauve-coloured dress. What would you agree? It couldn't quite land on the colour. A mauve long dress, and I've got long, dark brown curly hair. Oh, I'm so excited. So I'm going to be speaking today about how to reach new and diverse audiences and how to make your audiences feel really welcomed. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my story, a little bit about some top tips, and really actionable things that you can take away. And of course, we've got the Q&A as well. So I've got a lot to share, so I'm going to get going and whiz through. So I am an inclusion and accessibility consultant, and I love my job. I fell into it. I never dreamt of doing this, but I couldn't think of anything different now. So I always talk about this being the job that pays my bills. So I work with some of the world's biggest brands and businesses, and I get to help them on everything from inclusion and accessibility. One of my favourite clients, I know you're not supposed to have favourites, but one of my favourite clients is Primark. Have you heard of Primark? Yeah? Great. I have been a long-time customer of Primark, and I helped them to launch the UK's first ever adaptive clothing range. Because you guys have had Tommy Hilfiger doing it for a long time, but we over the pond have had nobody. And what makes it so amazing is Primark's price point is low, so it's accessible in lots of different ways. And I also do lots of guest lecturing at universities, and I genuinely thought I was never clever enough to go to uni. So the fact that I get to guest lecture now is a bit of a pinch me moment. I also do a lot of grant making and advisory work. I just closed a round of a grant for £3 million to fund disability justice and disability-led organisations. Oh, thank you. It's not my money. But thanks. But it's so scary. It's as scary as it sounds. It's a huge responsibility, but one that I massively enjoyed. And I love travelling. And I'm anybody's for a flight ticket, as you can tell. There's a picture of me there speaking in Saudi. So as I said, that's the job that pays my bills, and I do lots of other things that don't, and I'm sure we all do. I'm trying to launch an app to help disabled people save money, because you may or may not be aware, life costs a lot more when you have to live in a world that isn't designed for you, and you have to constantly retrofit your life. I added up all of my unavoidable extra costs in 2022, and it came to £13,000. So that's about $17,000. Just to live in a world, just to live in a world that isn't designed for me. So I have to earn enough money to offset my extra costs, then pay my bills and my rent, and then think about having a nice time. So I'm trying to launch an app to help reduce that. I also created 2 community organisations. One's the Asian Woman Festival, and the second is the Asian Disability Network. And there's a real theme in all the things that I do. I really wish they all existed when I was a young, disabled South Asian girl growing up. But I'm also creating space and a safe space for people to come and learn and share their experiences and get the support that they need too. And the reason that I've done... Oh, hang on. I'm also a children's author. I always forget to talk about this, so I've tried to be more mindful to include this now. I'm also a children's author, and I wrote a book called No Horn Unicorn with HarperCollins. It published in Dubai, which is why I'm standing next to the Burj, and it was on Amazon's hot new release, and now it's sold out. I don't know how that's happened, but I also have to remind myself I'm also a children's author. But the reason that I'm doing all of this is because I was born with a very rare genetic condition. It's got this fancy medical term, osteogenesis imperfecta, but it's more commonly known as brittle bone disease. So what that means is that my bones break without any trauma. I don't have to have an accident or an injury for my bones to break. So it's like your bones are made out of glass, essentially. So it meant I had a really interesting and unpredictable childhood. By the age of 14, I had broken my legs 6 times. And I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm actually really fortunate because people with my condition actually break between 300 to 400 times in their life. So I'm very fortunate to say I've had lots of different surgery, lots of treatment. I'm very metal now inside, and it's great. So I'm able to live the best quality of life that I can now as an adult. And what this meant, though, is as a child, I was segregated in terms of education. I was sent to a special needs primary school, and I really don't like the term special needs because I just think everybody's needs are different. There's nothing special about them. Do you agree? Yeah, have a think about it. So as you can tell, very small class sizes. Like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it, but I didn't know any different. I got to play a lot. And I've also learnt now, that good and bad things can coexist. It doesn't have to just be all negative and all good. Like, although I know that I shouldn't have gone to a special needs primary school, I still had a great time. So then I went to a mainstream secondary school, and it was a real culture shock from going from a small class size to a massive school with thousands of kids. I physically couldn't push my wheelchair up the ramp. It was huge, but I also felt like I couldn't keep up academically. But I scraped through, I got 11 GCSEs, and then my health was in a really good position because as a kid, I never had time to think about what my adult life would look like. I honestly thought I'd just keep breaking and I'd just keep having to learn how to walk again. But then suddenly I had loads of time on my hands and I thought I better get a job and, go on to further education. But I had a really harsh reality at the age of 16. I was proudly putting on my applications that I'm a disabled person, but my condition doesn't affect the job that it doesn't affect my ability to do the job that I'm applying for. I had got to the point where I'd applied for over 100 jobs and I hadn't heard anything back. And I was quite naive. I didn't think for a minute it would be because I'd be sharing my disability status. So I thought I'll do an experiment and I'll take that one sentence off, and I got offered an interview straight away. So I learned a really sort of big life lesson that people are judging my ability based on my appearance, but also there's so much stigma even when you share it in an application. This then really made me develop an entrepreneurial mindset. I was worried for my future. I didn't know how I was going to go throughout life if I couldn't get a job, a meaningful job, because at this point I was only applying for jobs that didn't even need any qualifications. So I thought, right, I'm going to go to university. And I thought I didn't care what the degree subject was. I just thought I just want the qualification. If I have that to fall back on, it will put me in good stead. So I went to uni and I studied a degree in event management, and I spent 10 years in the events industry, and these are some of my clients. Does anyone know who these people are? No, okay. Don't worry, I'll explain. So these are famous boxers. So there's Anthony Joshua on your left, and Tyson Fury on your right. And I'm in love with AJ. Don't you think we make a great couple? Don't you think we make a great couple? I think we do. I told my family that this is my engagement photo. They were not having it. Anyway, the point here is that when I went to the UK's most prestigious venues, worked with huge celebrities, as well as really prestigious organisations like Royal Institutes, they didn't expect me to be the person that they would be meeting that would be running the whole show. But what I also didn't realise is that I was so suited to a job and career in events because living in a world that isn't designed for you set me up to do that really well. Like, I'm the height of about a 4-year-old, maybe a short 5-year-old. But figuring out how to reach my kitchen cupboards is the least of my worries. You know, I live in London and I can't even use the tube, the underground metro system, only a quarter a step free. So just think about, you know, I have to think about everything. There are more clothes designed for dogs than disabled people. Everything I buy has to be tailored. But then if you think about the skill set you need in events and project management, you need to be organised, you need to know how to plan, be creative, think outside of the box, and of course know what to do in a crisis. Well, living with my condition definitely set me up for that. Then I was becoming a budding disability campaigner and activist, and I really wanted to make that my full-time job and be paid for it, but I didn't really know how. It wasn't really a thing that you got paid to do for a while ago. But I got a job with Virgin as their disability program manager, and now I'm really happy to share with you that I get to speak on some of the world's biggest stages. I get to be part of amazing campaigns and work with incredible leaders and businesses and brands, and I get paid to hold CEOs to account. Who doesn't love that? Thank you. And I was also named alongside Kamala Harris for CEO magazine on the top right there. Imagine if she becomes your president. I'm with her on the front cover, which is really cool. Thank you. And in addition to being a change maker in lots of different industries and sectors, I'm also a broadcaster on UK daytime TV. So you have a show here called The View. We have an equivalent, it's called Loose Women. Yeah. So sometimes I'm there, I'm on shows with a lot. It's basically all the mornings and all the Britons, like Rip Off Britain, Good Morning Britain, all of those kind of shows. And has anyone here heard of EastEnders? Yeah? Okay, it's a very long-running, famous British soap. Some people love it, some people hate it. I love it. And I had a small role in there as an estate agent. And now, in a weird turn of events, well, not weird, but a fun turn of events, I get to consult on all their storylines to do with disability and their South Asian representation. But look, that was fun. My baby photo's cute. Me and AJ make a great couple. But the reason that I shared all of that is because it's never been my condition that has disabled me. It's always been the barriers and the bias that I have faced that have been really disabling. And I want you to know that disability is an experience. Even though I was born with my condition and I'm going to have it forever, I am not disabled 24/7. I only experience it when I'm faced with a barrier or a bias. And disability is the name for the social consequences of living with an impairment or a health condition. And by the way, impairment, I know a lot of people think it has a negative connotation, but it doesn't. It's just an umbrella term to describe someone's individual difference. That could be physical, that could be sensory, or cognitive. So what you really need to understand is that we can either all be born with conditions and impairments, or we can acquire them. The majority of people who experience disability actually acquire their conditions at 80%. So if you know, or you are someone and you live with a health condition or an impairment, the chances are that they will have acquired it. And then also, you know, when I say that, it still shocks me. Like, why are we not designing for our future selves as a society? And of course, conditions and impairments, they can be visible and non-visible. In fact, 70% of health conditions and impairments are non-visible. So if we stick with this logic and this school of thought, disability is what we do to one another. Whether we do it intentionally, and I'm sure many of us don't get up in the morning and intend to do that, but many of us do it in a really unconscious way and we don't know. But I'm going to share how we can change that. And the reason that this can happen, or the reason that why we think about the disability community or, you know, disabled people is because of unconscious bias. Because we evaluate situations and people within a fraction of a second based on what we've experienced and what we've learnt in our lives. And without our being able to influence it, these kind of associations, they really affect our emotions, which in turn influence our decisions and our behaviours. Most of this process happens unconsciously. It takes place in every brain. So if that process of unconscious bias can really depend on, someone's life experiences, and, sometimes we might have beliefs about other groups, other people, other communities. They may be wrong or they may be right, but your unconscious bias is always going to find a way to back it up and make what you think right. And everyone can think in a way that involves unconscious bias, but it's important to be aware of it and not let it affect our decisions and behaviours. And it is a thing that is a bit easier said than done, but I'm going to help you today on how we can think about it. First, I need to tell you about the social model of disability. Has anyone here heard of that already? Just put your hands up. Yeah, a couple of people. Great, okay. So I came across the social model of disability by accident in my early 20s, and it changed my life. Because what I just talked about a little earlier, where disability is an experience and it's the barriers and the bias, that's what the social model tells us. Because the medical model, it talks about how you experience disability, or you are disabled because you live with your health condition and your impairment. And the medical model says you need to be fixed in order to fit in with society. With all the will in the world, I'm always going to be this height, I'm always going to have this condition, and that's okay. But what the social model says is, no, why don't we design accessible places, spaces, products and services? Then most things would be more accessible to the whole range of human diversity that exists. And when you base your practice in the social model, you are focusing on reducing and removing those disabling barriers. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I live in London, I can't use the tube. If I rock up at the tube station and call my doctor can't do anything about the inaccessible tube station. It's the responsibility of the people that have designed the infrastructure and decide where money gets spent and invested. Does that make sense? Because the truth of the matter is that the experience of disability actually affects us all. Because as humans, we're always growing and evolving and changing. Just think about the natural process of getting older and aging if we all get that privilege. We all have abilities, and we all have limits to those abilities. Now, on the screen, I have an infographic from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit. By the way, this is a great free resource. Check it out if you haven't already. And I've got 4 senses. I've got touch, see, hear, and speak, and I've got 3 categories: permanent, temporary, and situational. I'm going to help to bring this to life. So under touch, if we go with touch, the sense, under permanent, we have somebody who has upper limb loss on one side of their body. So permanently, they have the ability to use one arm. Under temporary, somebody has an arm injury. So for a short amount of time, even though they've got 2 arms, they only have the ability to use one arm. And under situational, we've got a new parent holding a baby. So now, if we gave all these 3 people the same task, they would all experience the same barrier. And that's how the experience of disability isn't just permanent. We need to think about this more holistically, because if we really want to reach more people and more diverse audiences, we have to understand how this can affect everybody. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the experience of disability, the social model, how disability can affect us all. Now I want to talk a bit about how we can approach removing those disabling barriers. And before I get into this, I just want to say that this can be applied to many things, many different strands and communities and diversity strands, not just disability. So let's get into it. I've got 3 images on the screen. I've got 3 people of 3 different heights: a tall person, an average height person, and a short person, and they're all at a football game. and there's a wooden fence in front of them that's preventing some of them from accessing the game. And in the first image, everyone's been given one box each to stand on, because it's assumed that when we treat people equally and we give everyone the same, it's the right thing to do and it's the fair thing to do. But in this example, the shortest person still can't actually see over the fence and see the game. Equality doesn't go far enough. So let's move to the middle image. Now this is an example of how we treat people equitably. People's individual needs have been taken into account, and now the tallest person actually didn't need anything to stand on, whereas the shortest person needed 2 boxes to stand on. And this is good, and I think most organisations are somewhere between image 1 and image 2, but the world that I want to live in, and the world that I know that will benefit everybody, is the world on the end, the third image. Now you may be able to see that the design of the fence has changed because we've identified that that was a systemic barrier. The design of the fence has changed, and now nobody has to ask for adjustments and accommodations. Because I can't tell you, it's so exhausting to go throughout your whole life asking people to do things differently and hoping that they're going to do it. And then obviously, the cost implications that come with it as well. So the cause of the inequity was addressed. By the way, what I'm not saying here is to stop giving people accommodations. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that's the world that we should be striving to live in, is we identify and we remove systemic barriers. Okay, I've got a bit of audience interaction now. Are you ready? Yeah? Okay, so I've got some random everyday objects and things on the screen. I'll read them out in a second. But there's one particular thing that they all have in common. Feel free to shout out your answer, or I don't know if there'll be a mic going around. But let me tell you what some of them are. So we have a curb cut, or dropped curb, that's what we say in the UK, when we cross the road, and you'll have tactile paving. We have a computer keyboard, captions and subtitles, a bendable straw, an electric toothbrush. We have technology like WhatsApp voice notes and your Google and Alexas, automatic doors, and the ability to text the emergency services. Oh, and we've got audiobooks as well. So who wants to kick us off? Any guesses? Say that again.
They started as accommodations for individuals who needed assistance.
They started as accommodations. Yeah, I think you've got it. Well, that was a bit anticlimactic, but well done. Well done. Normally, nobody ever gets it. You're obviously a very, on-point audience, so well done. So the answer here is that all of these things were originally designed for a disabled person, but they benefit us all, because if we don't own these, we will have most certainly used some of these things. Is that surprising to anybody in the audience? Yeah? Okay, I'm going to share a story a bit about them. So the computer keyboard, that originated from a typewriter. A typewriter was created for a blind lady to write her love letters. Aww, it's cute. Then we've got things like an electric toothbrush. That's for people with low dexterity. A bendable straw was created by a father so their child could have a drink because they couldn't sit up. Dropped curbs came into our infrastructure after the Second World War in the UK, and because we had loads of veterans coming back injured using wheelchairs. The ability to text emergency services and captions were created for the deaf community, but who doesn't now put captions on their videos to reach audiences, watch Netflix, and so many other things. And, your WhatsApp voice note technology, all of those sorts of things were created for disabled people. And when we talk about accessibility, in its broadest sense, what it means is that people are not excluded from doing something or using something based on experiencing disability. Accessibility means that people can do what they need to do in a similar amount of time and effort as it would take someone who does not experience disability or someone who does not have a health condition or an impairment. And we know it's the right thing to do. We now know it benefits everybody, and of course it is the law. But accessibility also has other incredible benefits. It helps you to expand your reach. And it's easier than you think as well. Some of the most commonly cited things that are the biggest barriers when it comes to accessibility in terms of accessing content are the lack of alt text, things like colour contrast, and the lack of captions. Those were cited as the biggest barriers to people accessing content. These things are easy to fix and easy to build into your standard processes. And, it's cheaper to do these things being proactive rather than having to do it reactively because someone wants to sue you as well. Just putting it out there. But look, let's take a look at the context. So, 1 in 8 people globally experience some form of disability and face daily barriers to access content and comms from brands and organisations of all kinds. 1 in 8. 30% of this audience said they experienced these barriers because of the content itself. So that is a huge opportunity for your organisations and for your teams and for all the other, businesses, organisations and brands out there to make a real difference and to improve in this area. We've got to talk about the money. Disability controls a $13 trillion disposable income market. It's a market size that is bigger than China. That is globally. And globally, disability touches 73% of consumers. That takes into consideration us as disabled people, but also our family and friends who will spend and want to support organisations based on their loyalty to disabled people. If they can see you're doing great things that support a loved one of theirs, they're going to want to support you and spend their money with you as well. But sadly, nearly 80% of disabled people would still describe their experiences as a failure. So I think there's so much room for improvement here. And just to add a bit of context in US stats, we talked about there how disposable income is 13 trillion globally, what that looks like for the US market. So working-age disabled people here in the US have a 490 billion in disposable income. These numbers are wild. I never get to say these numbers in the UK. We have a tiny market. But they also have a $21 billion in discretionary income, which is more than both the African American and Hispanic market segments combined. It is huge. And so when we talk about accessible marketing or accessible communications, what we're really talking about is ensuring that disabled people can easily receive and understand information. And this does include things like, Braille, large print, sign language. It could be audio, or ensuring that digital content works with assistive technologies like screen readers. The goal is to create equitable access for all. And as marketeers, you will also be speaking to lots of different stakeholders, including press. Well, journalists are disabled too. When I was doing some work with Primark on their sort of press releases, we created an audio version of their press release. We created different versions of their press release because we knew, especially disabled journalists, would be wanting to cover this story, but it's the right thing to do. And we weren't just doing it for that story, we're doing it for everything that we do. We've talked a little bit about this, about why it matters. But it's not just a legal requirement, it's about ensuring everybody has access. And I want to provide a very short example. So in the UK, if you cast your minds back to COVID and lockdowns and pandemics, I think we were one of very few countries who didn't have a British sign language interpreter, or we didn't have a sign language interpreter alongside our Prime Minister giving us our daily updates. I don't know about you, but I was confused with what they were talking about, and they were speaking my first language, English. I was confused with what they were saying, and I could easily understand it. And I'm sure many of you felt the same. Then imagine having to go to perhaps an unreliable source, who may also be just as confused, to find out what was said in that daily update. Can you imagine how scary, how isolating, and how frustrating that may have been for the deaf community or for the BSO community? And I'm happy to say that a group of deaf people got together and sued the government. and rightfully so. It's not okay. But coming back to this, why it matters, a wide audience reach. So in the US, 1 in 4 people have a disability. Roughly that translates to 27% of the adult populations, or about 61 million Americans. Again, huge numbers. In the UK, we have 16 million disabled people, so the numbers are reversed there. You're enhancing people's user experience, and accessible content is great for SEO, and it helps to keep you future-proof as well. Accessibility laws and regulations and guidelines, they're always changing. There's a big one coming in now for the European Accessibility Act. There's just been an extension on that, but it's huge. And we have to go beyond compliance as well, because compliance is the minimum standard. And I know this morning you were talking about hospitality and being welcoming and hospitable organisations. Just only doing the bare minimum is not really hospitable. You want to go above and beyond that. And I just want to talk about web accessibility. And I know not everybody in this room would own the website or, have that control over it. But there are different considerations for websites and web accessibility. And it is actually one of the biggest barriers. Because if you think about it, if the physical world is quite disabling for you, and then the online world is as well, it's a very isolating situation. But this is important for everybody and every department in your organisation. So the 4 principles are that your website has to be perceivable. Can it be accessed? If someone wanted to use your website with assistive technology, can they? How far would they get? Would they be able to get the information that they needed to? Is it operable? If someone only has the ability to access your website using a keyboard, would they be able to? Does it have that functionality? Is it set up for that? And when we talk about content and being understandable, the average reading age in the US is 7th to 8th grade. That's equivalent to a 12 to 14-year-old. So we have to be using plain English, plain language, and obviously different languages are great too. Make it easy to understand. Don't make it hard for people to follow as well. Make it easy. Even people with higher literacy levels skim read as well. So using plain language is best for everybody. And of course, is it robust? Does it work on all different types of devices, from websites to mobiles to iPads and things like that, lots of different devices. Because if it doesn't, if it fails on any one of those things, it's a very frustrating experience. But it means that visitor to your website will not be able to complete the task that they're trying to do. It might mean that you've lost their trust in that moment, and they may not bother coming back to visit your website or your organisation. By ensuring accessibility, we can help people feel empowered, we can save them time and money, and help them to live more independently as well. And they won't be frustrated by something that's poorly designed or poorly implemented. Okay. So I've got some examples of frustrating web accessibility. So this is an example from when Twitter used to be called Twitter, and it was telling us that we could now have a longer character count, but obviously that's not the case anymore with X. So if you are someone who uses assistive technology and you cannot see, but you use assistive technology to hear what's being read, this would be your experience.
More words, 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 more
It's like a rap,
more
isn't it?
words, more 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 words,
And it goes on
more words,
and
more words,
on
more words.
and on. Let's stop that. How annoying is that? So while brands think they're doing really cool things, putting loads of text there, putting loads of emojis there, it's not. It's not a good user experience for everybody. Now look, I love a good emoji. I am very fluent in the language of emoji, but even I have to restrict myself in how many I want to use. It's these little things that make the biggest difference. I've got another example here. So this is from Joe Biden's Twitter account, and it's his letter letting us know that he's stepping down as the president. And we can see there that there's something filled in the alt text box. So let's have a look at what that is. It just says, a letter from President Biden. It's not very descriptive, is it? And that's so important, right? So now imagine, again, you're using assistive technology, and great, you know it's a letter, but what does the letter say? That's also really important. The context is missing. So these are just some very small examples of the impact of everything I'm talking about today. And this session isn't about this is what you need to do, this is the font size, this is the colour contrast, because that's a whole separate conversation, and I'd be more than happy to do that another time. However, I did want to show this very short video I did with Google, which is just some top tips and a really good place to start for you all. So, enjoy. In the UK alone, an estimated 16 million people experience disability. That's 24% of the population. It's the largest group of marginalised people in the world, but one that is often over-excluded in marketing. It's essential for marketeers to prioritise inclusivity and not consider disabled people as an afterthought. So how can you ensure the digital campaigns you create are accessible and representative of everyone? Let's take a look at some best practices to help get you started. Step 1, plan ahead. Before you start, the most important thing you can do is to get the community around the table. Bring people with lived experiences and expertise onto your team to help you gain insights and create an understanding. Then, when creating your project brief, make sure you allow plenty of space for adjustment and flexibility throughout the project. Constant input from the community should really help shape the end result. Step 2, keep a checklist for essentials. There's a lot you can do to ensure the disability community can fully engage with your work. Take this ad here. The colours of the text and background are currently quite similar, making them hard to tell apart for neurodiverse, blind and partially sighted people. That's why it's really important that you use a colour contrast checker for all your visuals. When it comes to your visual design, you also need to pay attention to fonts, visual hierarchy and colour dependence. To ensure visually impaired audiences can engage with images, include comprehensive alt text and image descriptions. To make your videos more accessible, always include audio transcriptions to ensure blind and partially sighted people get the full experience. And add captions or subtitles for people who are deaf or have hearing loss. For video content that has text embedded, like infographics or animated videos, using a voiceover is recommended. And consider using sign language versions of your content too. And then some other crucial practices to keep in mind. While flashing images may seem like an attention-grabbing feature, they can actually be really problematic for some people, such as those with epilepsy or sensory processing sensitivities. Therefore, it's best to avoid rapidly flashing content or provide an option to disable or control such effects. Emojis are often used to express emotions. However, be mindful of the fact that screen readers will have to dictate each emoji description.
Smiley face, heart rocket, rocket fire.
So only use them at the end of a sentence and avoid using too many. The same goes for hashtags. While all caps or all lowercase hashtags might look nice, they are difficult to read. To help all users and screen readers differentiate the words with ease, use Pascal case, which simply means you capitalise the first letter of each word. Step 3. Gather feedback before and after launch. One way to make sure that your best practices are implemented correctly is by working with disabled accessibility testers for real-world feedback. From testing screen readers across browsers and devices to reporting bugs, this will be a crucial step to ensure you're really offering an inclusive experience for all users. But the feedback doesn't stop there. Even after launch, encourage users to report accessibility issues they encounter and have a system in place for them to address their concerns. If this all sounds like a lot, just know that it's better to do something rather than nothing. Starting and iterating will get you so much further than striving for perfection. So don't be overwhelmed and just start and build from there. For more guidance on making your marketing more accessible, check out Google's all-in inclusive marketing toolkit. So there you have it. There are some top tips and some areas on where to get started. And I hope that wasn't teaching you how to suck eggs. And I'm sure so many of you in the audience, you will know that. And if you do, I hope it's a friendly reminder. So look, in the last couple of minutes I have with you, we've got another bit of audience interaction. Woo! So let's talk about return on investment, because we know accessibility is the right thing to do, it benefits everyone, but you will have to get the buy-in of your senior stakeholders, people that control the money, and people who care about the commercials, because it is important as well. So, for every $1 that is invested into accessibility, what do you think that return is? Just feel free to shout out your numbers. 2, 10, 5, 7, 100, 65. Okay, some good guesses there. $100. I know. $100. I quote this stat all the time. We just can't argue with it, can we? And if you've got, senior people, you need to get the buy-in. Just show them this slide. Am I joking? There's loads of research behind this. This research was by Forrester, and it's called the 6 Steps for Justifying Better UX. So that's all about UX, not really even about accessibility. But it just goes to show that it's the right thing to do, and everyone will benefit, and your collateral will be out there and reach so many more audiences. So we can't argue with a 99% ROI. But also, when an organisation spearheads diversity and inclusion strategies, they are over 35% more likely to be productive as well as profitable as well. And that is research by McKinsey. And there are so many great outcomes, not only for your workplace culture, but for your teams as well. So in the last few minutes, I wanted to remind you to really try and mirror a true reflection. Don't make assumptions about what your audience composition is or looks like. Do the work and crunch the data to find out. Not all disabled people will label themselves as disabled or, see themselves as disabled. And in fact, all sorts of impairments would never think to look at a page labelled accessibility or this is for our disabled visitors either. So you really have to get to the heart of the community and understand what we look for when we want to visit your organisations or consume your content. And as we've talked about, accessibility isn't an afterthought, it should be embedded in the start. Take time to really understand, I've said this a lot today, but you can't do something for a community if you don't really get our barriers. You might think that you know a few things, and that's great, but then what's next? And the best thing to do is to create opportunities for disabled people and pay us as well. Provide opportunities for disabled people to give feedback, act upon it, consult with them as well. There are so many amazing people in this space, as well as your users and your focus groups that I'm sure you will already have. And often, I think this is a really important one about measuring your intention versus impact. We may think, well, now I've done X, Y, and Z, I know I'm going to reach all these people, or I think this is going to be the outcome of this if I've added captions or if I've put really good image descriptions. But if you're not checking with the community, if you're not giving an opportunity for them to feedback, you'll never know. Really, your intended impact may not really be landing. So definitely make sure that you're connected with the community. And that brings me to the end, but I wanted to leave you with one final thought. And I truly believe that every decision that we make, it can either raise or lower barriers to participation in society. So my question to you all is, what action will you take? It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be all-consuming. As I said in that video, start small, start somewhere, have a plan. But I'd really like you to reflect on, after hearing everything I've spoken about, what action will you take? Thank you.
Thank you for such an impactful presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for laughing at my jokes. It really helps.
I'm going to be leading the Q&A. My name's Anna. I'm a senior analyst at Capacity Interactive, and I use she, her pronouns. And we have a couple excellent questions for you today. The first of which, what are your suggestions for ways to push back when accessibility priorities are deprioritized by those making those decisions?
Oh, that's a good question. And let's be honest, it happens, right? I think it's understanding that accessibility is non-negotiable. For me, the fact that I live with my condition is no different to me having brown hair or brown eyes. Can you imagine going into work tomorrow and saying, today we're going to exclude everybody that has brown hair? That's what the equivalent of it is doing. And I know that's a really clear-cut or example, but ultimately that is what we're doing. We would never say, well, we're just going to exclude this group of people. We may have done it unintentionally or, not knowing how to include certain groups and communities, but we know that that's never our intention. So I just don't think we can buy that it can ever be deprioritized. As I said, we can't do everything overnight. We have to think of the quick wins, the low-hanging fruit. What are the easy things to do? Start there. And also, we're talking about change management and asking people perhaps to do things differently or to do some more work. Not everybody is going to get on board with that, but if we can help them to understand why and what the impact could be if we don't, then I think that's a good enough justification. And if the person or the team involved is motivated by the commercial impact, then we've already talked about that quite extensively as well. So I know it's easier said, but I just don't feel like it can be.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. This question, how can we make our websites more accessible if it currently isn't? Is there a company or software that you can recommend? And I think in a follow-up to something that you just said, what is an example that you might be able to provide of another low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, so an example of a good website. Can I say mine? I'm joking. No, there are some really good ones out there. But we've got to remember that accessibility means different things for different people. What I can say is don't think that overlays and widgets will solve your problems, because they won't. And a lot of companies out there are trying to sell people widgets and accessibility overlays, But actually, if the foundations of your sites and websites and the content and the headings and the boxes and things, if they're not all correctly formatted, it's not going to be a good experience. So avoid those and work with developers who understand the WCAG guidelines, that's WCAG, the website content accessibility guidelines, and also there's different levels to strive for. So I've gone for AAA accessibility on my website, and it was hard. There were so many things that I wanted or how I wanted things to look, but it just wouldn't have been accessible. But it's okay because we found a workaround, and I think my site's still beautiful. Check it out, shanidhanda.com. And I also have a sign language widget at the bottom that isn't British Sign Language, so it reads everything out in sign language, as well as lots of different options. And I do have an overlay, but it's because I have the foundations built in an accessible way. Some other good examples, I would say, is Microsoft's website. They're really good. And also their imagery is amazing. And if I can just quickly share another example. A lot of people ask me who are the companies that are doing accessibility well, and I will always say Microsoft. They have an adaptive Xbox controller, and they used their precious Super Bowl ad time to market their adaptive Xbox controller. Now, is the majority of the audience that watches the Super Bowl in the market for an adaptive Xbox controller? Probably not. However, Microsoft saw this as a great way to get the message across of how important accessibility is to them and their business. And that helps to build trust with customers and audiences as well. So if you're looking for good examples, I would say Microsoft. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Google. And Google, yeah.
Similar question for what you were just speaking about, though. So do you know of any arts organizations that are excelling at disability inclusion for audiences?
Yeah, my examples are in the UK, but there are some, and I was actually talking about this in the green room, actually. So it's expected that the biggest organisations with the biggest budgets will be the best at this, but actually there are some smaller organisations that are doing some really great work. And there's a theatre called Soho Theatre, and on my first visit there was just a sign by the flight of steps that says, "This flight of steps has 52 steps." That's accessibility. I really struggle with steps. Now, I could make the decision before going up the steps, did I want to climb 52 steps that day or not? That is accessibility. You know, that accessibility means so many different things to different people, but I just thought that was an example that I'd never really seen before, and one that I never knew that I could have really benefited from either. So that's an example of a small organisation. We've got the National Gallery and the National Theatre in London as well. They do some really good things. They send out dedicated marketing and newsletters about their different shows that are like relaxed performances or have BSL or audio description. So I really feel like a valued, person when they market me according to my needs that I may have, because I've signed up to say I'm interested in receiving information about that. They have a dedicated newsletter about it. So those are the small things that I know I've enjoyed and benefited from.
Thank you. What are some of the best practices for accessibility on social media other than including captions on videos?
So best practices, not overusing, emojis, as we've said, being descriptive with your pictures, alt text, image descriptions. If you go onto my socials, you'll see an example of how I do that. I put the video description and a video transcript, if the space allows me, in the main body of the text. I don't think it's fair to put it in the comments and say, for an image description, go to the comments, because why are you making people scroll through comments? Like, if you can, and if you have the space, put it in the main body. Also, audio, add captions. If there's a song or anything like that, add descriptions. Sometimes you know, I use social media in a really fun way, not just for work. And I have to explain, like, why I've chosen a certain track, for example, because it might not land culturally with some communities, for example, or it's just my weird sense of humour, who knows. But I think what I'm saying is be descriptive as possible, but really think about your different end users. Not everybody accesses and consumes content in the way that you do as well.
Thank you, certainly. One last quick question. You are such a powerful advocate and clearly have a very successful career, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you would go back and tell your past self if you had the opportunity.
Oh, this is always a really hard question, but I think I would say, like, don't worry, everything will be okay, because I think, yeah, when I reflect on growing up, like, everything was worry, like, am I going to get a job? Am I going to do this? Will I be able to live on my own? You know, everything was a worry. Not to say that that worry's gone now. The worries are different now, but I think as you get older, you become a bit wiser and you get to figure things out. But also, I think what I would say is the reason that I've got to where I am today is because I aligned my passion with my purpose and I followed that. And I took risks and I went out of my comfort zone massively. You know, even as a South Asian woman, I was never encouraged to go after and do half of these things. It was like, you know, I expected to be a bit submissive and just go along with the status quo. But I didn't want that. I wanted to live a full life and a life without regrets. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't really know didn't know what I was doing a lot of the time. But I believed in myself and I just put one foot in front of the other. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say, is don't sweat it and just believe in yourself. Yeah.
I think that's a very beautiful sentiment for us to wrap up on. So I thank you again for your time and for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.